You log into your banking app, right? And you see a deposit pending. Let's say it's for $10,000.
Always a good feeling.
Oh, absolutely. The number's sitting right there on the screen in bold font. It validates your worth. It makes you feel secure. But if you actually try to write a check against that pending balance, it bounces.
Yeah, because it hasn't cleared yet.
Exactly. It is real money, conceptually, but it hasn't fully cleared the institutional friction required to become usable currency. And, well, that pending deposit is exactly what a positioning hypothesis is. Welcome to the debate.
It's a great analogy. But I look at that exact same pending deposit and I say, yes, the bank needs to verify the routing numbers, but the entire purpose of that friction is so you can eventually take those funds to the open market and actually build something.
Today, we are examining the mechanics of claim mapping and claim maturity, specifically within the living professional record methodology.
The LPR.
Right, the LPR. And the central question we are unpacking today is this. Should a positioning hypothesis be primarily understood as a strict internal governance tool designed to restrain overclaiming and protect professional trust?
Or is it fundamentally an exploratory market-facing engine meant to identify gaps and translate evidence into new professional lanes?
I argue that the positioning hypothesis is fundamentally a mechanism of protective restraint. It is that pending deposit. It anchors professional claims strictly to the record to ensure they are truer, not bigger. It acts as a vital quarantine for immature claims before they ever reach the public.
And I see the positioning hypothesis not as a cage, but as an active exploratory mechanism. It's a market translation bridge that uses the record to identify proof gaps not as prohibitions, but as actionable development signals. It is the fundamental engine for a professional's forward momentum.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that restraint, because I think the underlying logic of the methodology is heavily weighted toward governance, and for good reason.
I mean, sure, governance is part of it.
Think about the era we are operating in right now. We are drowning in inflated ownership. We are surrounded by AI-generated summaries that read like, highly polished fiction, completely detached from human reality.
Well, nobody's arguing for polished fiction.
No, but they slip into it. So when we define a positioning hypothesis, the text is explicit. We have to start with what it is not. A positioning hypothesis is not a final brand. It is not a promise.
It is not a job title, and it is not destiny. I know the text too.
Right. It is a disciplined direction to test based on the record. The methodology establishes an absolute unbreakable rule. A professional should never turn a hypothesis into a public identity claim before it is tested.
I agree with the rule, I really do. But you're focusing entirely on the restriction rather than the utility. Let's look at the actual structure we are taught to use.
The formula.
Yes, the formula. The framework gives us a highly specific, almost mathematical equation for this. It goes, I may be well positioned for this role, function, problem, or audience because my record shows this evidence pattern producing this value pattern, especially in this environment.
Which is a brilliant structural choice.
But wait, it doesn't stop there. Crucially, it ends with the mandate. This needs to be tested against postings, conversations, feedback, and examples. A positioning hypothesis helps the client explore direction without pretending the answer is final.
And that first half of the structure is what forces the claim to answer directly to the record. By tethering the ambition to a specific evidence pattern, producing a specific value pattern, it acts as a vital guardrail against the evidence-to-claim gap. We see this gap constantly, though, where a professional's language radically outruns their actual source material. The hypothesis exists to stop a professional from spending unverified capital. It categorizes unsupported aspirational claims as unsafe for public rendering until the evidence is ironclad. It's a quarantine.
But a quarantine starves the organism of oxygen. I mean, how can a claim ever mature if you keep it locked in an internal audit?
By building the record first.
You cannot test the hypothesis in a vacuum. It is scientifically and practically impossible. When the underlying logic instructs us to test the hypothesis against conversations and feedback, that inherently requires taking the hypothesis out of the building.
Out of the building, yes, but not onto a billboard.
But the hypothesis is the vehicle for that safe exploration. It is the exact tool that allows a professional to safely interact with the market.
Wait, I struggle with this conceptually, and I really want to push back on how this actually works in the wild. You are instructing a professional to go out and test a hypothesis in the market,
Yes, exactly.
to have real conversations with operations managers, to network, to seek feedback. But simultaneously, the core doctrine absolutely forbids them from turning that hypothesis into a public identity claim before it's validated. How do you physically do that in a conversation?
By using the structure.
But the line between I am testing a hypothesis about my value and I am claiming this as my professional identity feels impossibly thin when there is a real job or a real contract on the line.
It's really not that thin if you were disciplined.
If I sit down with an executive to test my hypothesis that I can handle enterprise change management, how do I stop that from accidentally becoming a premature public claim?
Look, it's a great question, because it is a tightrope, but you prevent that drift by leaning entirely on the structure of the hypothesis itself. The structure has humility built right into its DNA.
Humility doesn't always survive a job interview.
But you aren't doing a traditional interview. You don't walk into a networking coffee and declare, I am an enterprise change management expert, because that is an untested identity claim.
Okay, so what do you say?
You use the mechanics we just outlined. You say, in my last 3 roles, my record shows a consistent pattern of driving adoption for new inventory systems across multiple regions, which usually resulted in a 20% reduction in downtime.
You're just reciting evidence there.
Exactly, and then you add the test. I'm having conversations today to explore whether that specific pattern of clarifying handoffs translates to what your organization calls change management. Do you see the difference there? You aren't claiming the title. You are sharing verified evidence and testing the fit. You are engaging in rigorous, evidence-backed inquiry.
I see how the phrasing attempts to mitigate the risk. I really do. But I would argue that even sharing it in that context risks the listener perceiving it as a fully rendered claim. The professional's own ambition will naturally pull them toward overstating the overlap.
Not if they stick to the LPR methodology.
That is why I keep returning to the idea of strict boundaries. The methodology specifically categorizes certain things as claims to avoid. It maps guardrails.
Guardrails, sure, but not brick walls.
Let's say your evidence is that you created a shared onboarding checklist for one local team of 5 people. And you start testing the waters of transforming company onboarding. The hypothesis framework immediately flags an evidence to claim gap.
Well, obviously, that's a huge leap.
Right. The scope is wildly disproportionate to the evidence.
The hypothesis acts as a prohibition in that case. It categorizes that aspirational claim as strictly unsafe.
You see a boundary wall. I see a construction site blueprint. Let's look mechanically at how the methodology defines proof gaps and bridge-required lanes.
I'm listening.
When a positioning hypothesis reveals a missing metric, a missing witness, or a missing credential, you are viewing that as a rejection of the professional's ambition. You are saying, stop. Prohibition.
But the framework explicitly defines a proof gap as an action item.
Calling a stop sign an action item doesn't magically make it a green light. It is still a prohibition against rendering that claim today.
It's not a green light, it's a materials list. It tells you what brick you need to go find to keep building.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's take a highly specific one. A military logistics officer transitioning into civilian supply chain operations.
Classic transition scenario.
Right. So their record might show incredible, granular evidence for coordinating complex personnel movements under immense pressure. Because of that evidence pattern, operations coordinator is a direct fit, or maybe an adjacent fit lane.
Agreed. The evidence supports it.
But suppose their positioning hypothesis targets enterprise supply chain director. That is a bridge-required lane. The bridge does not exist yet.
Hence the prohibition.
But the hypothesis doesn't just say, no, you can't be a director. By testing it, they realize, I am missing civilian vendor negotiation evidence, and I'm missing P&L budget oversight.
So they hit a wall.
No, the blueprint is now drawn. The professional knows exactly what applied project they need to volunteer for on Monday morning to pour the foundation for that bridge. It is a profound engine for growth.
It is an engine for growth, provided they respect the stop sign first. Because until that bridge is built, the doctrine dictates that the claim status is effectively aspirational or, unsupported for public use.
Sure, for rendering today.
Right. The claim status belongs to the claim, not the person. By identifying that proof gap, you are forcing the client to wait. You are prioritizing professional truth and the protection of trust over the client's desire to market themselves immediately.
But the goal isn't to hold them back just for the sake of being punitive. If we only view this as a system of prohibitions, we completely miss the transformative power of market translation.
Market translation is exactly where things get dangerous.
How so? Market translation just asks, what does the outside market actually call this evidence-backed value?
And that introduces a massive risk. This is arguably the most critical tension in this entire methodology. The absolute core doctrine is, do not make the claim bigger, make the claim truer.
Truer, yes.
If you prioritize market translation too early, you risk market language overreach. Let's look at ownership verbs, which the methodology heavily polices.
Oh, the verbs. Yeah, people love to inflate verbs.
Exactly. There is a massive difference between the verb owned, which implies primary authority, strategy, and budget control, versus the verb coordinated, which means aligning schedules and people.
Or supported.
Right, which means contributing to a larger effort led by someone else. Market translation inherently tempts the professional toward the verb owned because it sells better. The market language always sounds bigger than the granular reality of drafted a checklist.
The market absolutely exerts pressure to inflate verbs. I will grant you that. Overclaiming inflated ownership, invented metrics, credential inflation, it's a massive risk. But you are completely ignoring the opposite danger, which this methodology is equally built to combat: underclaiming.
Underclaiming? I mean, yes, it happens, but the primary threat to trust is inflation.
No, underclaiming is a catastrophic erasure of value. Think about the psychology here. Why do professionals underclaim? We see it constantly.
They think their work is mundane.
Exactly. They say, I just helped out, or I only updated the spreadsheets, or it was an administrative task, so it doesn't really count. They suffer from contextual blindness regarding their own excellence.
I'll concede that contextual blindness is real.
They minimize their contributions because the work felt easy to them, or because they lacked a formal title while doing it. Our job isn't just to play defense against inflation. It's to deeply investigate what others actually relied on this professional for.
But you don't need to test the market to figure that out.
Yes, you do. Very often, that investigation reveals deep, systemic contributions in operational visibility, risk reduction, or informal leadership. Market translation isn't just about restraining overreach. It's about elevating hidden, underclaimed work to its accurate market value.
But elevating the language without it.
If you treat the hypothesis merely as a cage to keep claims small, you fail the professional who is erasing their own history.
Look, I don't disagree that underclaiming is a severe psychological hurdle. People absolutely minimize their operational texture. But the solution to underclaiming is still rooted in evidence and governance, not market exploration.
How do you fix an underclaimed contribution without asking the market what it's worth?
You go back to the living professional record and you map the context. The context is what fundamentally changes the strength of the claim. A personal checklist you use at your desk is one thing, but a checklist that is adopted across 3 regional offices to improve first-week onboarding consistency?
Okay, yes, that's a stronger claim.
That context alters the claim, but notice the mechanics there. The claim is getting stronger because the evidence is stronger, not because we applied a fancy market translation to make it sound better. The governance of the record dictates the strength.
But how do you know what context is relevant to capture unless you are actively testing a positioning hypothesis in the market?
The evidence dictates the lane.
No, the hypothesis tells you which evidence to look for. If my directional guess is that I am well positioned for training documentation specialist, I now know I need to go dig through my emails for evidence of multi-location adoption or manager feedback.
That's reverse engineering.
The hypothesis acts as a compass. It directs the capture. Without it, you are just blindly archiving documents without a purpose.
I would argue the logic of the methodology fundamentally disagrees with that sequence. The system is built on a strict progression. Capture first, claim later, render lost.
It's iterative, though.
If you use the positioning hypothesis to dictate what you capture in the record, you're introducing massive confirmation bias. You end up only capturing evidence that supports the market lane you desire, and you ignore contradictory evidence or non-fit signals.
Non-fit signals are crucial. I'm not denying that.
And we know that non-fit is incredibly useful because it protects effort. The governance model ensures we look at the record objectively first, identify the value patterns natively, and only then form a disciplined guess.
I'm not suggesting we skip capture or ignore non-fit. I'm saying the hypothesis is the active mechanism that moves us from the static archive into the dynamic market. Consider how we handle privacy boundaries.
Okay, privacy is a perfect example from my side.
Let me finish. This is where testing is vital. A professional might have supported a highly confidential merger. The private truth in their record is supported stakeholder coordination during the Project Alpha merger.
Right, which you cannot say in public.
Exactly. The public rendering requires stripping out the client name, the financial scope, and the sensitive outcomes. The hypothesis is exactly where you test how to communicate that value, the market translation of a confidential act, without breaking trust.
But
You can't figure that out purely through an internal audit. You have to test the language out loud against the market's need for specificity versus the record's demand for primacy.
that privacy example actually proves my point beautifully. Privacy boundaries are the ultimate form of claim governance. The mapping process must carry those boundaries forward.
Sure, it dictates what evidence is shown, what language is used, whether a claim is interview-only versus summary-only. The positioning hypothesis must be subjected to these strict internal rules before it ever sees the light of day.
It's tested against them, yes.
It acts as a filter. It ensures the professional does not inadvertently leak confidential operational texture in their zeal to achieve market fit. It is protective restraint at its absolute finest.
Yes, it is protective. But a bridge has guardrails so that you can actually cross the chasm, not so you can stand safely on the edge looking at the other side.
If you skip this exploratory step, a rendering without claim mapping just becomes polished fiction. But a claim map without a testable positioning hypothesis is just a sterile academic exercise. The hypothesis categorizes the lanes into direct fit, adjacent fit, and bridge required. It answers the fundamental question, what do we do with all this evidence?
What we do with it is tell the truth at the right level of confidence. That is the mandate. We prepare the material for rendering by ensuring every single claim answers to the record.
The record is the foundation, yes.
If a client completed an introductory AI certificate, the governance tool ensures the claim remains completed introductory training or developing AI literacy. And it forcibly prevents the leap to AI strategy leader. It governs the ambition.
They know exactly what they must do to earn the claim they want. That is profound forward momentum.
I think where we naturally arrive today through all of this is a shared understanding that a positioning hypothesis requires immense intellectual humility. We both agree it is never a final brand or a promise or destiny.
Absolutely.
The professional must train themselves to recognize not just what the record supports, but critically, what it does not yet support. The non-fit is just as important as the fit.
I completely agree. The precision of language, knowing the exact mechanical difference between led, managed, and coordinated, is what makes this approach so powerful. It honors the complexity of balancing internal, granular truth with the necessity of external market language.
It's a delicate balance.
The tension between the blueprint and the bridge is what actually makes the structure sound.
Which brings us right back to our bank account. A positioning hypothesis is indeed that pending deposit. It represents real effort, real history, and real value. But it demands the discipline to wait for verification before you take it to the market. Because when you finally do write that check, the market needs to know it will clear.
And when it clears, you can finally build something new.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We will leave you to consider your own professional claims and ask, are they simply big or are they true?